Well, welcome everybody. I am so excited to have Julie back with us today for our Your Story Matters conversation. Julie was here just a couple of weeks ago and she shared a presentation in our Spotlight Coach section on gut health. Julie is a professional when it comes to helping you really navigate and heal from autoimmune disease and really get your gut in check. She came into this space because she had some really trying issues in her own personal journey. A lot of us coaches, we really do come into this space because of our own personal journey. And today I've welcomed her to come back and share her journey and what brought her into coaching and how she now serves and helps women heal from autoimmune and gut issues. And just reviewing or just talking just prior to our recording here today, Julie left home when she was 15, and I can totally relate. I left when I was 15 as well, and she was sharing how she just you just kind of like jump and you just hope to God you're making the right choice, right? But anything is better than the situation that you're currently in, and so you have to weigh it out. And we were also mentioning, like, looking at 15-year-olds today, we're like, how do we actually survive as a 15-year-old taking care of ourselves? It just blows my mind, and probably yours as well, as we look back and like, how did I navigate that? How did I manage to actually become like this human in this world that can make a difference in other people's lives when I've had such a rocky start? And you had to claw, like, I'm sure you had to build up a backbone really early in life and set your boundaries and all of the things. But Julie, tell us kind of that journey and what really was the turning point in your story that brought you into this coaching space and how you're serving others.
So I think of everything that I'm going to share, I want anyone who sees this or listens to this to really understand that no matter where you are, you can go anywhere. You can create anything, and I'm probably going to get emotional at times. So I'm just going to let you know that right off the bat. But I had no idea when I left home at 15 that one day I would be helping others and coaching. Like, I had no idea, because back then it was just about survival. It's interesting because I would say that there were two big turning points in my life that made me into, or have shaped me into, who I am. And one was leaving home at 15. And the other was when my husband passed away. And if I look at like a bird's eye view of who I was then and what I had to unlearn in my he's been gone for over 9 years now. It's funny because when I left at 15, I had to get tough, like what you were saying, I had to build resilience. But I also had gone through so much trauma in my sort of being raised by my parents. I'd gone through so much trauma, and that had made me so hard in so many ways. And it gave me the grit and the determination to survive, but it also I had walls around me in such profound ways. Yeah. And then back in 2012, when my husband passed away, it all just shattered, like everything, and I actually was brought to my knees in a way that I wasn't when I left home. And it actually softened me over time. Having gone through that loss, like really understanding what grief is. And of course, I had all kinds of health challenges as a result. And because I was struggling with my health, that was eventually what got me to go back to school for nutrition and for coaching, and got me to sort of keep going to try and uncover, like, how can I heal from the inside out and become what I view to be a functioning member of society. because it just broke me.
Right. It
Right.
would.
Like I was so broken that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't function. And
Mhm.
so my task was to put myself back together.
Mhm.
But it's like I've had two journeys, and that journey from like when I left home to his passing away, on that journey, I started collecting these pebbles, these pearls of wisdom that actually became the foundation on which I rebuilt myself. You know, so like in my 20s, I found yoga, and then I found meditation, and I found like certain practices. And then
Mhm.
I found more practices after he passed away. And those those things really helped me to keep going. But the funny thing is when you're at the bottom, you know there's nowhere to go but up.
So true, right? Yeah, there's like, I can't get any deeper.
Yeah.
um, no, that I can't, I can't, like I've lost some pretty important people in my life, but I can't even imagine the pain that it would bring losing a spouse, like somebody that you're dreaming to grow old with and to live life with, and you have dreams. It was a sudden passing, or was it something that snuck up fast and
No, it was very, very sudden. And I mean, when I looked back after the fact, there were certain clues, but
mm,
I didn't see the clues because I didn't have the knowledge
mhm,
and the wisdom that I have now.
mhm,
And so he had a heart attack, and he had a type of heart attack called the widowmaker. And this is also why I'm so passionate about health, because heart disease is a mostly preventable disease. It's a diet and a lifestyle illness for the most part. Just like type 2 diabetes is, most cancers are diet and lifestyle related. And so with the knowledge that I have now, it's like if I had known that back then, there are certain things that we could have done differently, but I didn't know. Like, you don't know what you don't know, right?
right? And you can't carry the guilt of that either, right?
No, no. I let go that guilt because it's like it it allowed me to learn and discover what I understand now so that I can help others.
Mhm,
And there's two ways to look at the challenges that life presents you. One is that it's a punishment and a judgment, and the other is that it's a gift and it's an opportunity. So I always chose to look at his passing as an opportunity for me to become a better person.
right. Be
Like,
victorious versus being a victim.
yeah, like I would pray on my kitchen floor crying. I would pray like, what does this mean? Like what am I supposed to be learning here? Like
Mhm,
I would pray.
mhm.
And it's funny because like sometimes when you make those kind, like you pray in that way, like from like this desperate dark place, the answer doesn't arrive the next day. It's a journey. You have to be One has to be open to receiving.
Mhm.
And so like I've stayed open on that journey. Like I've stayed open and just am open to learning, open to changing, open to understanding and applying too. Like
Mhm.
we live in the information age. Knowledge without execution is useless.
Mhm.
So for me, it's all about learning, applying and integrating, and then assessing whether it's appropriate for me or not. And this isn't, it's funny because like my focus is obviously more on nutrition, but I also look at spiritual practices and different types of, wellness protocols, like all of these things. Like we're multidimensional beings, and so I'm taking in information, applying, and then seeing, how does this feel for me? Like how does this resonate for me? Is this something that I feel I can apply and then, you know, eventually share with others. And some of the things that I've learned in the last 9 years, I use daily. And some I maybe only learned and used for a period of time while I needed it and then let it go. But there's just like this understanding that it's important to just integrate and apply, and also patience, right? Like I'm glad that I was willing to keep going.
Mm-hmm. And not give
I'm
up.
glad that I didn't give up. Like that's what my Michael, my current partner, always says about me. He's like, you don't give up. Like, nope, I do not give up.
And you know, I think being out on your own when you're 15, that resilience really comes in handy when you're up against a trauma like that, like a deep loss, is that if we didn't actually have that thick skin that we were able to develop as we were raising ourselves, when you come up against a trauma like that or a situation like that, it could be life shattering if
Mm-hmm.
almost impossible to pick yourself up off the floor if you haven't developed that skin. So you really truly, like, unknowingly leaving home and making that decision for yourself, you were already developing the strength and the tools that you needed to overcome this deep loss. I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, it's been over 9 years since he passed away. There's not a day that goes by where I don't think of him, but the way that I think of him has changed. Initially, like, all I could do was think of him like the times we had together, the future we weren't going to have, and it was like my heart was so broken. It felt like shards of glass in my chest. It was painful. It was painful to breathe. It was like my whole body was in such trauma, right? So that's the state I was in, and that's what I had to come back from. And now when I think of him, it's like I am grateful for the time that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish his soul, wherever he may be, that his soul is at peace, right? Which means, like, I'm not like in a state of, oh, I wish I was still with him. Oh, what if,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we would be this many years married and maybe we'd have kids by now. Like, I'm not in that what if state. I'm in like, that was my life then, and it was a beautiful life, and this is the life I get to create now with my now partner. And one isn't better than the other. It just is. Like an acceptance. That's the I mean, there are people that never come back from grief.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
You know, grief is like, I think, one of the hardest of human sort of journeys to go through. And I mean, I know people who told me stories while I was on my, like, in the worst part of my grief, saying, oh yeah, I know so and they lost their partner, they never remarried, they never did this, they never did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was like, oh, well, I'm too young for me to have that, like, to spend the rest of my life by myself.
Right.
But I do want to see where life takes me.
Yeah. And that
You know?
that is a really good viewpoint, because when you do hear those stories, then some women or some people in general can literally feel like, well, I'm not supposed to. They'll almost take that as I'm not supposed to be with a partner. Maybe I'm just supposed to be single, or they
Mm-hmm.
get that guilt where they're just like, if they have the desire to be in another relationship after a great loss, then they feel guilty that they're moving on. Maybe they're not supposed to, and all those emotions can come flooding into somebody. Did you
Yeah.
experience any of that, or was it just like, no, I'm just going to take this time for me? And
I think initially, so it's funny because, like, I met my current partner about a year after, just almost a year after Kim passed away. And if there's anything I would change is I would have waited longer to start a new relationship, because I was still in a state of grief. And it's funny because like I did say to Michael, I'm like, now's not a good time for me. I'm just not in a good space. I need to process more. And then we started seeing each other, and obviously all these, like, we're still together. But those initial months of our relationship were challenging because I was still processing. And I didn't know, like, you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't know that if I had just given myself a little bit more time, I would be in a different place. And I think because of how suddenly, like, basically I came home and I found him, and there was no warning. And so because it was so traumatic and so sudden, it took my whole, like, I was actually in a state of shock for a solid 3 or 4 months afterwards. Like I organized a funeral, I wrapped up an estate, I did all this thing still in a state of shock. So he passed away in September, and I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't like pretty much non-functional. And then in January of 2013, I went to go and do 10 days of silent meditation. And I only went because I'd already been meditating for a period of time, like for the previous 5 or 6 years,
Right.
that normally they wouldn't let somebody go into a silent meditation with what I was going into a silent meditation with. But my teacher said, you're going to treat this like any other 10-day sit, which is you're going to just observe the thoughts, observe the emotions, observe the sensations in your body. And if at any point it's too much, you cannot handle it, you can leave. And they normally don't let people leave, but in my case, they were like, you can leave if you need to leave. That whole 10-day sit, I just had a war, like, within myself.
Oh, wow.
I cried like nobody's business. But that was also when I first, the mark of me passing through shock into actual grief. So it took me 4 months to actually step into actual grief. And then the process began. And so, but now I understand what it is. And I know, oh, that I was still in a state of shock, even though I was doing all this stuff, like doing the funeral and packing things up and, dealing with the bank and dealing, he had started a job, and he was supposed to start a brand new job. He had 2 weeks off before he was going to start this job. And I didn't even know where he was going to start working. So I had to track down his old employer in Vancouver and ask them, I know that you gave him a reference. Who did you send that reference to? Because I have to call the company and tell them that he's not going to be coming to work. There was like, so yeah, it was very, very messy.
Yeah.
And so initially, I think when I started getting involved with Michael, I felt a little bit of like I was being disloyal. I wasn't honoring his memory. But then I also, at the same time, I also understood that if the tables were turned and I was gone and he was still here, I would want him to be with someone. Like, without a shadow of doubt, I would want him to meet somebody, fall in love, and have the best life possible. So
I know my husband, if I ever passed, my husband would not be able to survive without another woman in his life. So I would have to give him permission.
Yeah.
There is a few ladies in this community that have experienced this loss, and I've experienced losing a mom and some uncles and a gran and a stepdad, but to lose a husband is a special It's a special relationship. And I just don't know how to speak on that. So to speak to those women that are in the midst of their struggle, in their grief, and trying to process, and how do I move on, and when they're missing their husbands so deeply, what kind of advice would you give those ladies, to help them get to that other side of their grief?
I think it's important to honor where you're at and to also start to find the tools that work for you. So, you know, one of the things I did was I was seeing a therapist pretty early on. I was getting body work because my body was like was so much in shock. Like I felt like I was outside of my body, and it just felt very discombobulating for me. So I was working with body workers. So I had an osteopath that I was working with and a massage therapist I was working with. And so it can be very tempting to close yourself off from the world and do nothing. But I think it's important to talk to someone if it's not friends and family, but to find a neutral third party to start to process through the emotions. Because that's the big thing, is just moving through the emotions. And you know what? You're not loving your spouse less because you're starting to move on. In fact, living a good life and helping others and doing whatever it is that you're meant to do on this earth in the best way possible, like showing up as the best version of yourself, that really is the best way that you can honor their memory, right? Because and I don't think, like, I know my husband like so well. I don't think for a second he would resent or hate me for the life that I'm currently living, you know?
He's probably really proud of you.
Yeah, he's probably really, really proud of me for picking myself up off the ground and choosing to carry on. And that wouldn't have happened if I decided, no, the only way I can honor his memory is by crying every single day and looking at pictures of him and us and continuing to hold on to what happened. I think the the best way we can honor our loved ones is to carry on. So it's hard. Like I would say go easy on yourself in the beginning, you know, but also recognize, like, if I look back at my journey, I think once I started to go through grief, I held myself there too long.
Right. And that started affecting your health, right?
Yeah, because what happened was, and I know this now from research I've done of like how our brain works, is when we replay certain events, especially when they're traumatic events, our body and our mind doesn't know if something's happening now or it happened 10 years ago. So we keep putting these stress hormones through our system. It starts to play this loop. And in my case, what happened was my system was pushing out so many stress hormones that it burned out my adrenals, and then my thyroid stepped in and it burned out my thyroid. So, and I didn't understand this until years later, right? Until I was, you know, my symptoms were the worst between like 2014 to about 2018. And it wasn't until 2018 that I really started to understand what I had done to myself by constantly recounting the story of how he passed away and how I found him and how traumatizing it was. I mean, I don't know how many times I shared that story, like probably hundreds and hundreds of times with people. And then on top of that, how I was playing it in my mind.
Right.
I was making myself sicker and sicker. And it made the process much longer than it had to be.
Mhm.
And it's painful losing a loved one, but when they're gone, they're gone. Like, we can't bring them back. We just can't. That's not reality. And so if you can choose to go, okay, and that doesn't mean you're going to do it in a week, right?
That's
It
right.
it it doesn't mean you're going to do it in 6 months. It just means that you're going to go, okay, all right, this thing has happened, and let yourself cry, let yourself feel the emotions, let yourself go through that,
Mhm.
and don't push it away, because that's natural to go through it. But then start to find the tools that are going to support you on your health journey, so that you can actually move through it and not get stuck and not compromise your health more deeply.
That's right. So
You
my
know, I
my
kept,
older brother, when we lost our mom, he was in a state of shock for I don't even know how long. We had to drag him out of the funeral home because he wasn't
wow,
ready to leave. And then we had cremated my mom, and he took her everywhere, 4x4 and grocery shopping, everywhere.
wow,
And he got into addictions and alcoholism, and it has been, I don't even know if he's fully healed, but over the last, so it's been 25 years since we've lost her. And it's been the
mm,
last 2 years that he's starting to make better choices for himself. But in that 23-year period, he has had 2 heart attacks. He now has a pacemaker. He's got
mm,
diabetes. He is
wow,
he has really that whole process, every anniversary, like birthday,
mm,
holiday, any remembrance where you would often think of that loved one, it would torment him deep, to the point that it would just put him into this deep pit of despair, and he would just wreak havoc on every relationship around him. I'm
mm-hmm.
thankful to say that he is now making better choices, and it's still a journey for him, but it took him 23 years to start making better choices for himself and his family. And it's
Yeah,
hard to be stuck in that place of grief. So,
yeah. I mean, there's, I went through a period of that in the first few months, I would say, where I was drinking heavily, eating very, very poorly. And because of my background and because of my tools in yoga and meditation, I recognized that I wasn't doing myself any favors in that state, right? And so I started to make some better choices, but that's because I was blessed on my journey with the tools. And I think, sorry for my dogs, I think if someone doesn't have that awareness and they have nobody in their immediate circle that has that awareness, it can be so easy to numb yourself from the pain through food, alcohol, or drugs, because it's painful. I get it. Like, I've felt the worst grief of my life, and I have no doubt, as long as I am a human being on this earth, I will feel it again, because there are people that I love dearly, and I'm in another relationship. I have like, sometimes, especially now that we're here, sometimes Michael will go out and he's out longer than I expect. And so there's a part of me that gets a little bit scared, like, oh my God, what if something happened to him? Because that's the crazy thing, is when something happens suddenly and you lose a loved one, that little bit, that it stays with you, where
yeah,
you're just a little bit cautious of life. But thankfully I have different tools, and I would say that anything that numbs your pain is not helping you in the long run. It
no,
helps you maybe in the short term because it dampens the pain, but that pain, that grief will always find a way out,
yeah, we still have to
because
face it.
we have to process it. And if we don't process it, it's still there. It's still there. And yes, it can make you sick. It can literally make you sick.
Yeah, you holding on to that and how it affected your thyroid and all of the things that brought you into that space, that like that. It's a crazy how our bodies will manifest um the disease and all these different things, these barriers that get broken down when we're in that state of trauma or walking through
Mhm.
grief and shock and all of the things. Our body feels all of it, and if we don't listen and take care of it, it will manifest in these other ways, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the best and most loving thing anyone can do for themselves is to have the courage to feel these human emotions and process through them, because you're, no matter who you lose, whether it's a spouse or a parent or whoever you lose, um, I don't believe for a second that our creator wants us to be miserable for the rest of our life as some kind of homage to our loved ones. Like, I just don't think that that's what is supposed to happen. You know, one of the things about being human is we get to experience this range of emotions, like, you know, happiness and joy, but also the other side of that, which is grief and loss and longing and all of those darker emotions.
mhm.
But it's all colors of the rainbow. And you can decide how long you want to be in a certain state. And if you're holding yourself in a certain state, you're not helping yourself, really.
That's right. That's right. So I guess like the next, like as you're coming through that grief and coming to that understanding of how all of that trauma was affecting your health, and you have deep dived into learning how to take care of yourself, and you definitely went to some major extremes when it comes to your health, because you're like, no, that it's all or nothing, because that's that resilience that you had when you were 15, right? Like it's like, I'm
Mhm.
deep diving, like I'm making a decision, I'm doing this, and I don't, everybody get out of my way. So you have definitely taken that path, and it's so rewarding that you have done that. Not only have you been able to find a level of healing and understanding, and still being able to honor your husband as you move on into this new life, and being able to help others combat their health issues and really taking back their power, because when we get stuck in that space, it can be paralyzing. And I love that you are now taking that pain and you're now using it as a purpose to sow into other people's lives. It's such a rewarding experience that you can actually wake up every day and be like, yeah. I share recently, I know I'm babbling, but my
Mm.
I I often will say I feel closer to my mom today than I have my whole entire
Mm.
life. And it's been 20, I I've I haven't lived life with her more than I've had her. Like I only had her for 19 years and I've been without her for 25. But I
Mhm.
feel closer to her today than I ever have, because I honestly feel that, I don't know if she pulls strings up there or what she does, but I definitely feel that I am honoring her by making these choices in my life to really make
Mm.
a difference in other women's lives, to break that silence. Um, but to really take this knowledge that you have found with the health journey and really helping people support their insides so that they don't have a cesspool of disease happening and ready to gear their ugly heads. It's such
Mhm.
a rewarding experience that you can do that in honor of this experience that you've endured. Like, bless you, like, because not everybody has the strength to do that. And I pray and hope that with us doing the work that we're doing, that we can actually encourage and inspire and light the flame for those that are stuck in that struggle, that they too can take that pain and they can use it as a purpose and then honor their loved ones by living their life, not mourning it.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it's very, very important to, number one is I didn't understand. Like if I think back to Julie back in 2012, what was I doing around the time that he passed away? Um, I was a full-time working actor in Toronto. I had, previous to that, we were living in Vancouver, so I used to teach yoga while I auditioned for stuff. But when we were in Toronto, I was working on a TV show. I was producing a play. I was writing a play. So I was kind of living the artist's dream, right?
Mm.
Yes, I had like these tools of yoga and meditation, but there was a lot about the body that I didn't understand. There was a lot about the mind, and I think like some of the things that I know now is cutting edge research that's just happened in the last 4 or 5 years. So this wasn't even around 9 years
Right.
ago. But there was a lot that I didn't know. And this journey that I've gone on, this willingness to sort of move through one of the worst experiences of my life. Like at this point in time, losing my husband what was or is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. It is. And but by choosing to get on and to get on with my life and to learn, I've acquired all this knowledge, not just about nutrition and wellness practices, but also like how magical our bodies are. Like we're self-healing machines. But in order for that healing to take place, we have to understand and appreciate all of the things that create illness and then all of the ways that we can create health, because it's not one thing that creates disease and it's not one thing that creates health. So, in my daily life, in my sort of daily practice, I have a spiritual practice. Why do I have a spiritual practice? Because we're spiritual beings. And
Mm.
so if I lived my life as just a human going from doing to doing to doing and my to-do list and my material objects and never connecting to source, I'd be missing a aspect that's very, very important, I believe, for health. I think part of the reason why people get depressed and they feel disconnected is that they don't have that spiritual connection. When you have a spiritual connection, you understand that there is a higher power that is looking out for you, even when it feels like there isn't,
That's right.
right? There's no way that that higher power that created you wants you to suffer,
That's right.
you know? So I always make a connection to that higher power every single day. That's the first thing I do before I do anything else.
Mm.
And then there's taking care of my body. What does that involve? Well, exercise is part of it. So I do yoga, I lift weights, I go for walks, you know. There's obviously the feeding of my vessel, right? In order for my body to make healthy cells, it needs certain types of food. And so sometimes when people hear my philosophy on food, they go, "Oh, you're restrictive." I'm like, "No, I just understand that certain foods create health and certain foods create disease." And so I just don't look at certain foods as nourishment because I know they're not nourishing, right?
Right.
When you look at the world in that way, then it's easy to make certain choices, right?
Mm.
Um, and so, and then what's the other part of it? Well, relationships are really important. So I work on my relationships with my partner, with my friends, because we're social creatures and we need that. And then there's also addressing whatever, if there are any emotional traumas or issues, like I'm at a point where that's not really an active part of my work, but I also never shy away from that kind of work. If I'm like, oh, you know what, I'm hitting a wall, like maybe there's something that I need to work on or process through.
Right.
But because we're multi-dimensional beings, I'm looking at all these aspects of myself, and I'm also paying attention to like I live in a city, so there's a lot of chemicals I'm exposed to. So making sure I'm detoxifying my body and taking care of gut health and all of these things,
Mhm.
because it's layers, right? It's understanding the layers that create health and the layers that cause illness. Like, what causes illness in our body? Well, stress, right? What kind of stress? It can be emotional trauma, it can be physical trauma, it can be chemical stress. And food can cause illness, right? Yeah, if you're eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of foods that don't have nutrition or have a lot of preservatives or chemicals, well, food definitely is linked to illness, as is a whole range of lifestyle habits, like not exercising, right? Not moving, being sedentary. So, and not dealing with emotional stuff or emotional traumas. Like, there's a book that I read years ago. It sits on my bookshelf back home. It's called Childhood Disrupted. And it goes through all of the things, all of the traumas that can happen to people that create certain manifestations of certain illnesses. And the crazy thing is, when I got to the section of the book that talked about, well, how do you undo these childhood traumas? All of the practices that I have of meditation and tapping and nutrition and working with a therapist. I've worked with therapists off and on since I left home. All of those practices are listed in there. There's also art therapy and things like that, because there are tools. Like, when you go through trauma, that's one thing, but you don't have to stay in that place. It's making the choice to move through and then starting to utilize. So I don't know, the way that life has worked, that it led me to all of these practices that I've brought into my life and have used to strengthen me on my journey. And I'm always learning, right?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever stop, right? I think a day without learning something is a wasted day.
Yeah.
So we'll always be learning. But that's great that you unconsciously or subconsciously you were already had these practices in place so that you were already equipped to process this heart-shattering grief. So you were,
But I also think that it didn't, I think that the higher power worked in very mysterious ways to put these things onto my path.
so true.
And I'm a curious enough being that I always go, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Let me try. Like, how I found out about yoga, even though I'm South Asian? I didn't know anything about yoga. Nobody in my household talked about yoga when I was growing up. My parents didn't practice yoga. It wasn't a thing. I didn't know it existed. There was no internet back then. Imagine that. So I was living in LA on a movie set. I think it was like my first movie project or second movie project I ever worked on. I had like some silly role as an actor. And there was a girl on set who started chatting me up, and she was like, oh, like, have you ever tried this and this yoga? And I was like, what is yoga? What is this thing that apparently came from the land of my ancestors? So she's like, oh, come with me sometime. So I went with her to a yoga class, and it was hard as heck. And at the time I was running and I was lifting weights, because I ran all through high school. I was running and lifting weights. And I went to this yoga class. I could not touch my toes. I got my ass handed to me, but I felt, in this stage of suffering that I was in this yoga class, I had just had brief glimpses of being at total peace in my body.
Aw,
And I was like, oh, I'm coming back. And
yeah.
that was almost 22 years ago.
Wow. Just a little speed. Hey, that's awesome. Thank you, friend on the movie set.
Yeah. So, like, things have happened that kind of, when that I've when someone's talked to me about something, I've been like open-minded enough to like explore it. Now, obviously I don't do things that are dangerous. Someone comes to me and goes, hey, let's I don't know, let's go jumping out of a plane. I'm probably not going to jump at it, although I have done skydiving, but only once after I took a course. So I didn't like just jump out of a plane. But usually most things, if it sounds interesting, I'm going to give it a try. Even meditation, which has been a part of my daily practice now for, 14, almost 15 years, happened because I was teaching at a yoga studio in Vancouver, and the owner of that studio just basically said, because I guess at the time he felt that I wasn't grounded enough in my teaching, he's like, you need to go do Vipassana meditation or you can't be on the schedule.
Oh, wow.
So I went and I signed up for this 10-day silent meditation course back in 2007 because I wanted to be able to continue teaching yoga. And because I did that, I found one of the most transformative gifts in my life, which has been a daily meditation practice. But if he hadn't done that, or if he had said, you have to go do this, and I had said, forget it.
Yeah, exactly. Because we all have choice at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah. But he said it, and I was like, all right, if that's what it's going to take, then that's what it's going to take. And since then, I've done like six or seven 10-day silent meditation retreats. And sorry, there's a fly flying around here. And it's one of my biggest tools that I use in my life. And when I was going through grief, that first 10-day sit got me from shock to grief. And then at the end of that year, December 2013, I went and I did another 10 days of silence, and it just helped me move through my grief a little bit further.
yeah,
And
such a powerful practice. So yeah, well, I just want to thank you and honor you for sharing your story, because it's not easy to have to relive that pain, and that just the reminder of, like you said, like you would share it lots and it would be a constant reminder. I hope and I trust and believe that you have the different levels of healing, that sharing it today is not as painful as it was sharing it 5 years ago. And the more we do share, I believe that the more healing does come, because I know there was a season in my life that I couldn't even talk about losing my mom without falling into a puddle of mess. But now I can share it and honor her in her journey, that she did what she could to get to where she was. And she might not be here to continue life with me, but I can still honor her in the way that I am doing it today in my coaching practice. And as you are, like, you're helping people find true health and understanding of how to listen to their body and how to fuel it properly and how to move, and these tools of meditation and even just yoga and all the things that have been brought into your path to bring you to this healing journey. Now you're able to sow them back into other people's lives. So thank you for that. Thank you for stepping up, actually taking it and using it to bless others.
Yeah, and I think if I can say, my sharing my journey today, like, it doesn't, like, I have some tears, but it's not pain the way that it was. It's just, it's different. I don't even know quite how to describe it. And I would also say that I'm sharing this, what I shared today, I'm sharing in service of others. Like, I hope that someone who hears this and some aspect of this conversation resonates with them, where they start to, if they are deep in grief or they are in a very challenging time in their life, where they start to go, okay, this really sucks, but how can it get better? I actually want to talk about this very briefly. Is a tool that a naturopath I worked with years ago, prior to Kim's passing away, she gave me this beautiful gift of asking questions. And it's also which questions you ask. So like when he passed away, I was asking that question to my creator, like, how is this helping me? How is this serving me? How is this making me a better person? I asked the question, and the answers eventually came. And so I think it's also important to like sit in questions and ask questions when you're in a challenging, like one of my favorite questions is, what's the next step? What's next? What's next?
Yeah.
And I don't expect the answer when I ask that question, but I ask the question in full faith that the answers will present themselves. And the answers might present themselves through an idea that pops into my head during meditation, or maybe I'm out for a walk, or maybe some conversation I have with somebody, or something I see. But I allow myself to be open to the possibility of answers. And so like I'm glad we had this conversation. I hope it helps somebody.
Yeah.
There's no part of it that brings pain to me at all, because I've done all the work to move and process through this. And yeah, I just hope that it helps someone get unstuck and understand that life is always happening for us. It's never to us, it's always for us. And hopefully they have the courage to step in and go on their journey, right? All of us, each of us is on a hero's journey. Joseph Campbell. We're all on our individual hero's journey, and we are the hero of our own story. And all of the people that we meet on our path, they're almost like mystics guiding us along the way.
Yeah, teaching us all kinds of lessons. So if you missed Julie's Spotlight Coach presentation, if you just go over to the Spotlight section and check out her presentation on gut health, she'll give you lots of really great tips and resources or understanding of how to support your gut and what's the best ways to really take your health to another level. But just as a quick reminder to those that are hearing our story today, Julie, if they hear your story and they're like, yes, I have these things going on in my body, and maybe it's because I'm suffering through grief, and Julie understands my level of grief, how would they get in touch with you to reach out and to really get your support and your knowledge?
They can always email me directly. So my email is Julie, Julie, at balancelifewithjulie.com. So balance is BLANCE. So balancelifewithjulie.com.
I'll make sure to put a little link here at the bottom of our video before we go put it live in the app.
Yeah.
But I absolutely honor you for coming and sharing your story today. And I do know that it's going to encourage and support a few of the women for sure, but hopefully many more to come, and just inspiring them to keep moving forward in the process of their journey up through grief, and that there is a light on the other side of the tunnel, and that they can find some resolution and take their health back, because some of them are struggling with some health issues as well because of the grief. So thank you so much for sharing. And I do, I can't even say that enough, because my heart, like, it just warms me that you took the time to come out of beautiful Mexico to share this story with us today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be in this community.
Thank you, Julie. And I do look forward to continuing our journey together. Take care.